Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi.
hi.
Good evening.
Before we begin today's live show, I see some people, some friends already here with us on the live chat. Please type in something, give a thumbs up or anything if you can hear us, if the sound quality is okay. We can hear each other fine, yeah?
Yep.
I think so far so good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, let's start. So, good evening, everyone, and hi, welcome to the Inner Links YouTube live show of the year. Happy New Year, everyone! It's already in the middle of February. This is our first YouTube live after like a month's break. So just a quick brief background. The Inner Link, we are a psychological wellness center based in KL and also Kuching, and we do this monthly YouTube live thing, talking about all things mental health related. And we took a 1 month break for the New Year holidays and also to focus on the Inner Links Coaching new chapter launch. So to everyone watching, if you know about the Inner Link in KL, you'd be pleased to know that we have opened and launched a new chapter in Kuching soon. It's going to launch in about a week, 2 weeks from now. So please check, follow our social medias, look for us at the Inner Link on social medias for more information. So I'm very excited to introduce today's topic. Today's topic is about the differences between a counselor, a clinical psychologist, and a psychiatrist. This is a very popular question that we have received from our followers and communities, also from a lot of personal friends, because I think a lot of people starting to thinking about accessing mental health care for the first time, and then we get, maybe you might get overwhelmed by, oh no, should I go see a counselor first? Should I go see a therapist? What's the difference between seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist? So today we are going to talk about that. If you have any questions about it, please feel free, don't hesitate to leave your questions in the comments, and then we will get back to you soon. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest for today. So uh, today's one is very interesting. To answer all the questions, we have one from each profession. We have Dr. Johan Arif, we have Vernie, and we have Leah. So please, Dr. Johan, would you like to go first and introduce yourself?
Okay. My name is Johan. I'm a psychiatrist with KKM, with the government. And what else you are doing to say? Yeah, so I'm here to represent the psychiatric fraternity, I guess.
Fraternity. All right. So representation for camp psychologist when you up next.
Right. So good evening, everyone. My name is Wen Yi. I'm a clinical psychologist with the Inner Link KL. So yeah. So I'm from Chem Clinical Psychologist. Then
All right. And next up from camp counselor. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Ilea and I'm a registered and licensed counselor with the Innerlink Coaching and I am here to represent Camp Counselor.
All right. So let's start with the first question. I think one of the most commonly asked questions that we receive is, what is the differences between uh, counseling and psychotherapy? And then later on, we can discuss about what is the differences between psychotherapy and psychiatric care. So, Wenyi, would you like to take these questions? What, as a clinical psychologist, how is there any? Would you say there is any difference between psychotherapy and counseling? And then later on, we can hear from Leah. Like, what is your take on this?
right. So I think based on my very own understanding, I feel like there's a lot of different answers there. But based on my own understanding, what I feel like is counseling could be for a lot of very general kind of stuffs as well, right? So probably with like life choices, a lot of different very general kind of like stuffs. In psychotherapy, for psychotherapy wise, I think it's more on like based on certain kind of psychotherapy modalities. Kind of like personalized to look at different specific issues, or sometimes even more clinical kind of like issues as well. So that is kind of like my understanding that I know. Probably what we can see is like counseling is more towards short term, or like some maybe like certain specific kind of like events, incidents. Psychotherapy probably is more towards the kind of more long term kind of like answers. So maybe if the rest have any different input.
Leah, do you have any input? Like,
Sure. Okay. I
do you
think I
agree?
think Wendy was able to actually kind of touch I think a very good general outlook of what counseling and psychotherapy is. So I do agree, when we talk about counseling, sometimes it's a very short-term thing, and a lot of the times it has to do with life choices. So I think the perspective I can take here is maybe counseling specific to mental health, and then what psychotherapy is. So um counseling and psychotherapy actually work hand in hand very, very closely, especially in mental health. If counseling is the medium for it, then psychotherapy is what drives that medium. So in counseling, in mental health counseling specifically, counselors, registered and licensed ones, apply theories and techniques from psychotherapy into their sessions. Um, but the question you were asking earlier just was, what was the difference, right, between counseling and psychotherapy? So
Yep.
while counselors use long research theories and techniques in psychotherapy, every counselor has their own individual style of counseling. So perhaps what's really different between counseling and psychotherapy is the kind of approaches in psychotherapy that's applied by different counselors. So let's say when he was talking about these specific approaches in psychotherapy, and I do agree. So let's say there's one counselor who's using what we call a person-centered approach, and another counselor who focuses on cognitive behavioral therapy approaches. So the person-centered counselor will focus a lot on listening actively to the client and ask questions to encourage the client to open up about their
Mm-hmm.
concerns. But the cognitive behavioral counselor is going to be focused more on a more directive stance. You're going to question and challenge your way of thinking. They won't be afraid to call you out. So these are two counselors, but different approaches to psychotherapy used in their counseling sessions.
Okay. Thank you so much, Wen Yi and Leah, for shedding light on this. It's very interesting to hear about like, the different modalities used in both counseling and psychotherapy. So for this, I'd like to follow up with Dr. Johan. So as a psychiatrist, when patients come and see you in the psychiatric clinic, do you also prescribe psychotherapy? Because I think that's a very myth, common myth or common fact that if you go to see a psychiatrist only prescribe medication and not therapy or counseling. What do you have to comment on about this? Is it any difference or similarity there?
Okay, I'm gonna answer. I think all my answers tonight are gonna be very, if it's based in an ideal world,
Yeah,
with
basically.
enough budgets and enough human resources, right? So let's just technically, as a psychiatrist, I am trained to do both counseling and therapies, different modalities of therapies, and I think the one that was strongly pushed for us was the cognitive based therapies, as well as psychodynamic or psychoanalytic therapies. Those are the ones that we paid more attention to, but we still have to know things like your DBTs, your ACTs, your different types of therapies, right? So technically, if I have the time and not as much patient load, I would do well. We approach things in the modern uh, view of what the human psychology is, or human psychopathology is. Uh, so we go by biopsychosocial, right? So biologically, we would treat with medications, with diet change, with a lifestyle change, and things like that. And socially, we would we will help facilitate changes in the patient's day-to-day life, including relationship with interpersonal relationships, with their workload, how to handle the stress and things like that. And psychologically, we would help with basically therapy. So finding out the coping skills where it lacks, help with their self-esteem, their emotional regulation, and things like that. So in an ideal world, and if you pay me well enough, I think for us, we would do all of those that has been mentioned. But of course, being in the government setting, we are, and because we are servicing a huge amount of the population, let's keep in mind that there are only, if I'm not mistaken, about 600 psychiatrists serving all 20 million of Malaysians, right? So, so in practice, most psychiatrists would handle the psychopharmaceutical side. Uh, would I say only? I hope not. I hope not only psychopharmaceutical, but they also do other things like supportive therapy, brief supportive therapy. We refer to counselors and psychologists if they need more intense therapies. We refer to our occupational therapists, our physiotherapists. We have services such as home, what do you call it, community psychiatry, which basically we do home visits, supportive employments, and so forth. So the scope of what a psychiatrist does is huge, and understandably, like I say, there's only 600 of us, more or less, and it's not enough. We can't provide it to everyone. So that's why we need the psychologists and the counselors to kind of like share, well, share the burden.
Like hand in hand.
Yes, yes.
All right. Thank you so much for shedding some light also on the huge job scope that I think psychiatrists have in this, and how you can work hand in hand together with other registered counselors and also clinical psychologists or therapists out there. Um, so I think there was like the latest statistics is like the ratio of psychiatrists serving the population in Malaysia is, I think, currently 1 point something to 100,000 population.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think we can all see here that why it's very important for, like, all three professions to work together hand in hand. So which leads to, I think, the next question that I want to ask is like, so now that we know like what are some of the differences and similarities between the different types of approaches that these three professions take, uh, let's let's talk about something a little bit more fun. So let's describe. Can we hear the three of you describe how your day-to-day work differs? Like, let's say a counselor's day-to-day versus a psychologist day-to-day and a psychiatrist day-to-day. Okay, yeah, you want to go first. How does a registered counselor's day-to-day work routine looks like?
That's a very interesting question. I feel like when you ask me that question, Jess, it's like walk me through what a counselor is doing day to day. And I would say the focus, of a lot of counselors they put a lot of their energy into their sessions specifically. So we're talking about counselors for mental health, right? Just,
Yep.
the focus day. And the major job scope is really to have the sessions with their clients, and on a day-to-day basis, depending on how the counseling process itself and how far in counseling has gone with this client. It could be, in the early stages of getting to know a client today, or working on goals with this client. The next client may be setting goals with this certain client. So there are several stages in the counseling process. So you can technically see that, but on the backside, you may also be able to see, okay, maybe taking down case notes, because we can't remember everything, and we definitely need to take notes in order to remember, what our clients are going through. And perhaps also a bit of admin work, getting clients to actually come, to see us, because it's still a profession after all. And I think that's maybe just a brief touch about what I would do as a counselor.
I see. So what about you, when you as a clinical psychologist, do you also have to do the same thing, admin work and case notes? How's your day to
Right.
day different?
Right. I think it could be quite similar. Of course, in the morning, I'm trying to get trying to just prepare for like seeing clients. That would also take a lot, I think, right? Like getting up, getting coffee or whatever needed. And then like so clients, I think seeing clients for me is slightly different, which is there are some clients coming in for therapy. There are also certain clients coming in to get assessments. So the difference probably would be like in terms of therapy, it's more of like what Leah has mentioned. So kind of like setting goals, looking at what are certain things that they want to work on, what are certain areas that clients want to explore. So that is something that we do discuss with the clients to see what would the direction be for our therapy. In terms of assessments, there are certain clients who want to know like what are they experiencing, whether there's a diagnosis for it, whether this is something we say that clinical or not. So they do come in for certain kind of like assessments, psychological assessments. It could be like mood disorders like depression, anxiety, and much more other conditions as well. So with that, then we do also kind of like take a slightly different approach, which is to kind of see like whether they meet certain diagnostic criteria, and from the diagnosis we do also kind of give suggestions on what they can actually do next. So, for example, if medication, where to go, if you want to continue on with therapy, what do we need to work on? So that's basically it. And I think back to the case notes part, where like what Leah mentioned, we won't be able to remember everything, and so that case note part is quite important. So just trying to jot down and also think about a little bit more on what's the next plan gonna be like. So what's next, and just kind of like settle all these admin stuff. So I think the admin stuff is the part where not many people know about it. I think they always think like, oh, it's just seeing clients, but with case notes and as clinical psychologists, sometimes we do write reports as well after conducting these assessments. So a lot of paperwork as well.
So doesn't matter whatever the job or profession is, cannot escape paperwork and
Cannot
admin
run.
work. Yeah, but it's interesting what you point out. People think have the image, you just see the counselor or the therapist on an armchair, and then that's it. They just sit there and talk, but actually, what they don't see is a lot of paperwork behind. So,
Yes.
what about you, Dr. Johan? Does your day begin with a cup of coffee, also just like Wen?
Well, I wish. Usually my day starts quite early. Psychiatrists in the government sector starts their day at 7:30, 8 a.m., their working day. And usually what we do the first thing in the morning is to do our rounds. That means we go to the ward, because in comparison to other mental health specialists, what psychiatrists do see patients in patients, yeah. So and we have to see their progress and adjust whatever medication, or we prescribe whatever therapies that we can help with the patient. And after that, we do have our cleaning as well, whereby which is quite similar with both Leah and Wenyi. We have to prepare stuff. We have to remember that we have to remember all our patients. We have to have a good documentation on each patient for each visit, because just in case, like, I'm on leave, or I'm not around or whatever, right? So somebody else can just read our documentation and know where I'm going to with this particular patient and things like that. Other than that, depending on what subspecialty that I'm in, I would perhaps also get referrals from other departments. So I think in the hospital that I'm practicing in, we have liaison psychiatry, which is basically where we get referrals from different psychiatric units, different medical units in the hospital. So it can be your orthopedics, your surgical departments, and so forth. We have the addiction psychiatry, specifically dealing with substance use disorders, either withdrawals or not intoxication so much, but withdrawals or substance-induced psychiatric issues like psychosis, mood disorders, and so forth. We also have the neuropsychiatry department. This is the more uh, brain focused branch of psychiatry where they deal with people with neurological issues like stroke, um, uh, some traumatic brain injury, epilepsy, meningitis, that comes with a psychological problem of behavior or psychosis or mood disorders and so forth. So, and we also have community psychiatry, like I mentioned before, whereby this is the arm that does the outreach as well as the home visits. This is the more accessible part of psychiatry where we actually go out and help people and like we don't wait for patients to come to us, we go out. And we in community psychiatry we also do like job placements, we and all these things lah. So yeah, so but depends on where I am specialized in, then I would do those things. And of course, being in the government, there's a lot of admin work. Some of it is not tied specifically to psychiatry. We have, the incident reporting paperwork that we need to do, or whatever it is, like quality assurance and things like that. So yeah, so I'd be lucky to get a cup of coffee in the morning, I guess. But if my medical officers are nice to me, they would order loose coffee for me.
Hint, hint.
Oh.
If
Dropping
they're
hints.
listening.
So hint for a lot of if any big companies or corporations out there want to do like mental health outreach, sponsor like all these 3 professions, their daily morning coffee, you all need it. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Johan, for sharing with us your day-to-day routine. You too, Leah and Wenyi. I hope everyone listening in will have a lot more appreciation for the mental health care professionals who are doing like tireless work behind the scenes to serve as much of the population as possible. So now that let's look at the next. We got a comment. We have a question in the chat box from Izumi Inulit. So who should we go to if it's our first time seeking help? Counselor, psychologist, or psychiatrist? See, this is what I think we mentioned earlier on. We were talking about at the start of this chat. It's a very commonly asked and very popular questions for someone who is about to seek mental health care for the first time in their lives. And there's so much information out there. Like, where do we start? How can we help? How can we help Izumi decide who to see first? Leah, would you like to take this?
Sure. I think maybe all 3 of us have maybe different perspectives on it. So please feel free to correct me if anything. But I think it's safe to say it's not wrong to look for any of these 3 professions if you feel you need help, in any of these areas. But maybe what we can do to help is maybe walk you through what's going to happen if you come in to see me or see Wenyi or see Dr. Johan. So let's say if you were to see a counselor, something that you can expect when you walk in to the session is when you come in and we get to introduce ourselves and then get to know a little bit about each other, what we would do is I would start to inquire. We know what brought you here to the session in the first place. And then hopefully you'll be able to open up about those concerns and challenges that led you to seek help in the first place. And that brings us to this stage we call exploration in counseling. And it's one of the most important stages in counseling, and it's also an ongoing process because not only does that help you talk about your current concerns and challenges, but also help the client, a client or maybe you, Izumi, identify those underlying issues or even the roots of those issues and challenges you're struggling with. So say maybe for you, Izumi, as an example, if you find that you're having difficulty, for example, communicating your feelings and emotions to other people, well, that could come from the underlying belief that if you show others that you have problems, that makes you a weak person. And so we talk about, what's brought about that belief. Why are you thinking about these things and potential reasons behind it? And once we're done with the exploration stage, we can plan certain goals to help you overcome those challenges and issues. So that could mean learning how to communicate with others more effectively, to be honest in that communication so that you don't have those emotional outbursts, so that you can be more honest with yourself and with other people, or maybe even a goal of practicing self-care. So you know how important it is to take care of yourself. And hopefully, by the end of reaching those goals, and if those goals are specific, attainable, and planned within a certain time frame and are realistic, hopefully you'll be able to overcome those challenges and prepare yourself better for future challenges if they do arise. So that's what will happen. And I think maybe Wendy or even Dr. Johan can, maybe share what would happen if you come to see them.
Right. I think like Dr. John, you wanted to go first?
No, you go first, please.
Right. Okay. So I think for me it's kind of like also similar on like what Leah would mention. So if coming in, if you're looking to kind of like explore certain kind of like issues, challenges, concerns in life, then that's what we'll kind of like go through, getting to know what's first, right? Like what are the things that you want to kind of like work through. There are certain clients who are quite clear that if they want to get like a kind of like assessment, either for any kind of like formal purposes, for example, they need it for academic purposes to apply for like well-being, so there are certain kind of like well-being support systems, like in the uni and everything. So with that, or sometimes even for work purposes, then they can probably come in and to see clinical psychologists or even psychiatrists to get them kind of like mental health assessments done. And then from there, then we will kind of like go on to the assessment route. So I think that is what we kind of like do if you just coming to us. It's either if you want to talk about certain issues, or if you want specifically like assessments done, then this would be like what we can help in terms of like seeking help wise. Yep. Then I think maybe Dr. Johan would have something different.
Well, I wouldn't say something different. I think what you guys say very pertinent and very is the realistic thing of what we are doing, right? But I think in the sense of seeking help, if you feel like you need to seek help, don't care whether it's a counselor, psychologist, or psychiatrist. Find the nearest one to you, the most accessible one to you. We are working well with each other so far, so we do refer to each other. So, like if you come to a psychiatrist and the psychiatrist feels that okay, this thing can be handled by a psychologist or psychiatrist or a counselor, then we would refer the cases to them. Even if I've had a lot of referrals from both counselors and psychologists when they realize that hey, this client has a severe mental health issue or would benefit from psychopharmacology and things like that, then they would refer to us. But I think the most important thing is that seek help, no matter from where, right? Well, from no, I take that back. Not no matter from where, seek help from a licensed counselor, clinical psychologist, or psychiatrist, because we do have a lot of people out there who mm, claim that they can help with mental health issues, and a lot of the time when our clients go through them and then come to us, they are in more difficult positions, and sometimes they are not even open to getting um, our help because it doesn't conform to their thoughts of what mental health help is. So make sure that if you're looking for help, get it from a registered and licensed counselor, clinical psychologist or psychiatrist.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Johan, Vanya, and Leah for answering this question, and thank you, Izumi. Thank you so much for asking this very important question. I think you are also asking on behalf of the rest of the audience and many other people out there who are also have these same questions in their mind. So, to sum it up, start somewhere, seek help from proper licensed and registered professional help. And it's interesting also because based on my personal experience as someone who has been there on the other side of the table, in the past, uh, I was also, the same person with the same questions, bogged down, like didn't know where to start. And my first step was to go to KKM, Ministry of Health Public Hospital, to seek psychiatric help, because that was also the most affordable access for me at the time as a student. And then, like you said, Dr. Johan, and then my psychiatrist there said, like, okay, we'll put you on this prescription, etc., and then refer. And then she then referred me to, see a counselor for further psychotherapy after that. So yeah, I hope this sheds light for everyone how these three professions work hand in hand, taking care of a patient's or client's mental health. So which leads me to talk about this next situation, right? So everyone experiences some level of anxiety and stress, right? Someone wanting to seek help, like either from a counselor or psychotherapist, they experience some level of anxiety and stress. But what separates normal levels of stress from clinical definition of disordered stress and anxiety? In other words, people always say that, oh, you're stressed, everyone's stressed, but how do we know at which point it's a clinical definition of disordered stress and anxiety that warrants this person to seek help from, or seek therapy, or some form of mental health care? Would you like to take this?
Sure. I think to me, what I always share with my clients, that it doesn't have to be something that we call clinical before you can actually seek help, because everyone has different levels of how you perceive these feelings as well. Like, you might say that, but you like that only, well, why you stressed? But I don't think that that's something good, because everyone perceives things differently. So there's no, to me, there's no so-called of like, I need it to be very serious before I can actually seek help. But if we are to talk about like how would we separate like normal levels of stress from clinical definition of like anxiety, based on what we are trained, we have this thing called the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual for like mental health disorders. So what we see from there is when we carry out certain kind of like assessments, we do look into whether these signs and symptoms do fit into the diagnostic criteria of these specific mental health conditions. So, for example, if you're talking about anxiety, in the DSM-5, what we see is the generalized anxiety disorder, which is the thing that usually we call as like anxiety when we diagnose that, right? So, there would be certain symptoms and signs that we really need to look into before we can kind of diagnose a person having generalized anxiety disorder. Yep. So, but still, I think the very very main point I feel like it's always very important to emphasize is that you don't have to make it something clinical before you can actually seek help, because we can actually explore a lot of all these things even though it's not like a clinical thing. Even if you just need someone to talk about certain things, it's also okay to seek help. Yep. So
Very
that's
right.
my
I
take.
agree. I agree with you that we don't have to wait. But if we want to go all nerdy and understand what is the clinical definition of a disorder, basically a disorder, if you read the DSM-5, every single disorder will have this caveat that it affects some functionality, right? So what that means is that um, either depression, stress, anxiety, whatever it is that you are having, it already affects how your day-to-day life work. Now, this could mean your work. Most people think that it means your work and your ability to get money, but it also means it also encapsulate different domains like your interpersonal relationship, your the way you talk to your spouse, to your friends, to your colleagues. Maybe you're a bit more irritable, that you drive people away, or things like that. That is already a disorder. That is already a dysfunction. It could be with your work, where you can focus or not, or things like that. Or it can be like even your emotional regulation, where you yourself, even though you can perform at work or and in front of other people, but you yourself feel overwhelmed and feel that you cannot go on, right? So the term disorder signifies that whenever there's a dysfunction in one of your domains. So, but everything else is right. When you said, uh, if you feel that you need help, please come. You don't have to wait until it's clinical. In fact, it's better if you don't wait until it's clinical, because then it will be harder to treat.
Thank you, Dr. Johan, for clarifying the definition of what is meant by when you say disordered debt. Uh, I think that is a question that a lot of people have also. And thank you, Wendy, also for your feedback. Leah, what do you think? Do you also agree? Do you have anything to add on to this? Because I feel a lot of people think that things have to be really really bad, like the stress has to be like dysfunctional kind of levels before someone thinks that they deserve to go and seek mental health care, because
Mm.
there are a lot of factors to think about, like cost or everything. So what do you think, Leah?
I think it's great that we're emphasizing how you don't have to be at a certain level of
Yeah.
specific stress or a certain level of anxiety in order to be able to seek help. Because if you do need support and if there is a way for you to feel better and to improve, then why not just try? So I think just to add on to what Wendy and Dr. Johan has shared, maybe for this question, you'd be curious, how you move from get counseling into maybe getting a potential diagnosis, right? For maybe disorder, any anxiety disorder. It could be generalized, it could be a specific anxiety disorder. So unlike in Wenyi's profession, which is a clinical psychologist, for Wenyi, she's providing formal diagnosis, right, to clients. At the counselor side, what we can do is more like a screening kind of mental health assessment. So potentially this client may already be showing certain signs of anxiety. So what we can do is a mental health assessment for that, such as the DASS 21. And we notice, okay, so we can see this client is experiencing very high level of anxiety symptoms. What can we do about that now? So if, let's say, while we are working on the sessions, the client is carrying out, their coping skills and strategies in order to manage those symptoms, and we notice, okay, it seems like you're still struggling in this area very specifically. There are a lot of physical symptoms coming, emotional symptoms that just with counseling, it looks like maybe you need a little more help. And this person may say, maybe I need some, maybe I want to really have immediate relief of these symptoms, or I maybe need a diagnosis to better understand what is going on. Then a referral can be made to a clinical psychologist. A referral can be made to a psychiatrist. But as far as I'm concerned, to be referred to a psychiatrist, you would need a GP or a psychologist referral letter in order to be able to see a psychiatrist. So I think that's what I can add on.
Okay, thank you, Leah, for also helping to explain how the referral process works. I think the same referral process also works for, let's say, a clinical psychologist making a referral to a psychiatrist.
Right. I
Um,
think that. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, with I just have to say this because in the government system it's a bit different. We do need a referral letter from a medical doctor. I don't like it, but that's just a system. Yeah, so it has to be either a GP or another psychiatrist or anybody who is even your statistician can write you a referral letter, but not your clinical psychologist or counselors, which it doesn't make sense to me. But unfortunately, that's the system that we have, so we have to do that.
Yeah, that was what I wanted to add on. So I think like from what I know from my clients as well, that usually for government settings they don't really take that from us lah. So in unless they want to go to the private setting, then the letter will kind of like help the psychiatrist to understand what's going on so that they can kind of like get into talk about what are certain signs and symptoms that require the help of medication. So that is something that we usually do. So probably if they are going to government settings, we won't be able to help too much with that.
Okay, this is very important facts for everyone to know out there, because when I was starting to look for see someone also, I did not know all this. So to be clear, let's do a recap. If someone would like to see a doctor, a psychiatrist in the government setting, they need a letter, a referral letter from a doctor, correct? Uh, and the letter from, but not a letter from a counselor or a clinical psychologist. But if they could afford to seek, let's say, private psychiatric care, and then that letter or assessment screening, screening or assessment documents from a counselor and clinical psychologist would be relevant. Is that correct?
And I think to add on that, like if they want to go through the government pathway, they can actually also go to like KK, right, the Klinik Kesehatan, which is like the community clinics around. So that could also be a very affordable option instead of only going to like private clinics to get that referral letter.
Yeah, and if you are seeing a psychologist or counselor before, I think, well, I personally would appreciate the letters from them, their own assessment, because it will help with my management of the patient, right, or the clients. So while we do need the doctor's letter, I think we would gain in a lot of insight if we have the counselors or the psychologist letter as well.
Wow, it seems like we've covered a lot of burning questions here today. I think all three of you in your separate work settings have like heard multiple variations of like this same questions, right? Who to see first and how to get there. I hope everything that the audience have heard today will be helpful to someone out there. So now I have a question for Leah. This is a question for camp counselor. So can a counselor can also be labeled as a therapist? Because I think there are a lot of mental health profession related terms floating around out there that are being used interchangeably, you know, counselor, therapist, psychotherapist. So would you say that a counselor can also be labeled as a therapist? And what is the difference between a therapist and a LKM registered counselor? For everyone else in the listening in, if you do not know, LKM stands for Lembaga Counsellor Malaysia, which is what the counsellors in Malaysia are registered under.
Well, I'm glad you asked this question, just because I think even myself, I get confused sometimes when my clients would suddenly say my counselor and then my therapist, I'm like, wait, didn't you say counselor last week? So the simple answer is yes, you can call your counselor your therapist. And I'm saying that because here you specifically mentioned an LKM registered counselor. So again, when we in Malaysia, right, when we just say counselor, not all the time we're going to run into people who think mental health counselor. Sometimes when you say counselor, people may think of legal advisors, they may think of attorneys, HR management, I don't know, guidance counselors at school, etc., etc. So that makes counseling seem like when you mentioned just like short-term service, right? But to bring the therapist aspect, when we bring again psychotherapy into counseling, right, and you're using theories and techniques in psychotherapy, which may not only last just weeks, but even months or even years for some people, that makes it a very therapeutic approach when someone really wants to make a change in their lives, when they really just want to seek help. So in my opinion, I think a therapist for mental health is not simply someone who just provides therapy, but someone who is licensed and trained to provide services in mental health. So feel strongly the same goes for not just myself as a counselor, but also to Wendy and also to Dr. Johan, who are also providing therapy in their own trained ways as well. Yeah.
I guess the term psychotherapist is not an official term in when we talk about so psychotherapist is just somebody who does therapy, who does psychological therapy. So it can be a counselor, it can be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So that's the thing that I wanted to talk about in the beginning, before the show start, right? Because all of us here are psychotherapists in some. It's just different types of therapies and different types of. So there is no difference, I think. but but
What
but
about
psychiatrists
what?
don't. Some psychiatrists don't do therapies, so perhaps we don't call them psychotherapists.
Yeah, you wouldn't psychiatrists don't normally call themselves psychotherapists, but if they do, they would describe as also offering talk therapy or psychotherapy alongside medication, correct? Is that right?
I mean, if you want to get technical about it, yeah, psychotherapists are people who do therapies, right? But there are some of my colleagues do focus more on, say, the what do you call this thing, the rehab aspect or the pharmacological aspect of psychiatry, and those are very valid fields as well. So, and if they don't do therapies, then technically they are not psychotherapists lah. But yeah, like it's just psychotherapist is not it's not a term that denotes. It's not an official term to say whether you are a counselor, a psychiatrist, or a clinical psychologist. It can be either one.
Mm. So I think when you what's your take on this also? So now this is a similar question, but now for clinical psychologists. Again, all these interchangeable terms. So the terms psychotherapist and clinical psychologist are also often used interchangeably. What would you say? Like, would you say these are two different labels? Why clinical?
Right. I mean, like if you are talking about like psychologists and psychotherapists, I would say like psychotherapists. Oh wait, my train kind of like crashed a bit. Okay. So psychotherapists are usually like what Dr. Johns mentioned, like people who actually provide the therapy part. So psychologists who clinical psychologists who provide therapy and all that can call themselves as psychotherapists. But if you're just looking at just psychologists, which means you are not trained to do clinical work, which means to do therapy and all that, it's not really a psychotherapist. So the difference I would say is that for clinical psychologists, we do have to go through further training to kind of like specify in terms of like clinical disorders, assessments, how do we carry out therapy. These are things that we need to really learn. So if you're looking into other kind of psychologists, there are like educational psychologists, organizational psychologists and all that. So they wouldn't be really carrying out all these therapy work. So they won't be able to call themselves psychotherapists per se. So I think that is just in terms of like the different branches of psychology, depending on like what they choose to further study, further specify, specialize in. Yep. So I think that would be the difference then.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, three of you, for answering these questions. Lots of hot takes for burning questions out there. Uh, I'm looking at the chat now. Izumi is back with another question. Thank you very much, Izumi, for still staying with us and for asking this question. So the next question that we'll take from our audience is curious. Why is mental health care so pricey in Malaysia? Not everyone can afford over 200 ringgit plus per session, especially when they are in need of long-term mental health support. Ooh, hot question. Dr. Johan,
I think Wendy wanted to go.
No,
Yeah,
I'm just like no. I was just like this is like the harsh
Yeah.
reality.
harsh reality. Maybe
Can
we
I
can
have
hear
a go
from
at this?
Dr. Johan first.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a psychiatrist from KKM side.
Okay. Yeah. Unfortunately, psychology or mental health in Malaysia is a it's a rich man's disease. Poor people can't be psychologically unwell because they can't really afford it, you know. But that's this dark humor that we have in among my colleagues. Yeah, you're right. It's very expensive out there, but and partially because of things like how to, at least from the psychiatric side, right? Even having the place, we need to adhere to a very strict rule in the Mental Health Act. The clinic itself, where you position the doors, the medication, and things like that, is very strictly adhered to, and all that things. And I'm sure it's the same with clinical psychologists and sorry, counselors as well. So that in itself is cost. Bears a lot of cost, right? Secondly, this field is a very high require a very high skill of there's a high skill ceiling to it, and even the floor is very high. Not everybody can do psychology, not everybody can do counseling or be a psychiatrist. Even among my non-psychiatric colleagues, like other doctors, a lot of them will tell me that I don't know how you do it. You can sit with a patient for an hour and things like that, right? So it's also pricing our skill set at this. Uh, and I hate to say this, but unfortunately, mental health clinics, whether either psychiatry, counseling, or psychology, unfortunately, it's a business, right? There is a lot of things that you need to handle, right? For example, for us compared to normal clinics, right? In normal clinics, in 1 hour, you can see 10 patients, 20 patients, and you can afford to charge them maybe 80 ringgit, 50 ringgit per patient, right? But for us, we realistically see about one patient an hour, right? And this seeing one patient is very, very heavy emotionally, mentally, and physically. There's this thing called transference and counter transference, which I don't think we will get into in this name, but it's basically the psychic connection that we have between the patient and the therapist, right? And as much as it tires the patient, the clients, it also tires the therapist as well. So you have to remember that as well, because we can't. I don't think I can do more than 5, 6 patients a day. Like if I were to give a high quality service to a patient. So being in a private setting where you don't have a huge turnover every day, uh, to counteract, the costs that you need to bear to run the clinic, you have to charge at that amount lah. I hate to say it, but it's true. I mean, we have to be realistic, right? So that's the issue with costs in psychology in Malaysia. Is there anything else you guys want to add?
I think it makes sense, like in terms of like the specialized kind of like education and training that we have to go through, because it's not just like study like just a degree program and then you come out and then you be like, okay, I'm done and I'm just gonna hop into provide therapy and all that. Unlike there are certain courses which are more specifically like degree programs in terms of like counseling, that would be a different story. But just for example, like as a clinical psychologist, we need to go through master's program, and for certain counselors as well, if you don't take that degree in counseling specific route, you probably have to also go through that master's in counseling route as well. And I think for psychiatrists it's even more longer, because after you are doing you're just like a general medical officer, you still have to go study for specialization in terms of like psychiatry, and then you need to spend a few more years before you can actually graduate and come out to work as a psychiatrist. So the number of years, dedication, time, effort, and all that, it's really very costly as well. But not just to say that, but I think sometimes maybe I would say like the government, we definitely do need more of this, like subsidy or of these things that are more budget allocated in this, before we are able to actually put things at a more affordable rates, because then again, like what Dr. John mentioned, the time and everything that we spend with each client is also very different if they just go to like a doctor for medication and a very like physical diagnosis, for example. So I think the difference there would really make it like the cost and all that very huge difference lah, unfortunately.
Yeah, and to add on to what Wendy said about the time that it takes, right? I think one of the questions that you shared with us in our email prompt is how long does it take for for somebody to be a psychiatrist? After your SPM, I counted it, right? If you go the fastest route, right, meaning that there's no issue with your school, you pass every test in when you're a houseman or intern, you are well, and your supervisors give you high marks on each year's evaluation. The fastest time that you could be a psychiatrist is 12.5 years. So 30, the youngest psychiatrist theoretically could be at 30 years old, but this is also this is not realistic, right? Most psychiatrists that we see are more at 35, 36 years old. So yeah, it's a long process. I know I look the youngest, but yeah, it took a long time for me to be here. But yeah, so that goes into the training as well, right? Like this all takes money, like you have to remember that us mental health professionals are humans too. We went through all this, and we have a lot of debts. So we have to pay them as well. So
Student
that's
loan
why
there.
yeah.
I think also with like a lot, we also have to do a lot of like continued education, training as well. Like, so it's not
Yeah.
just right after masters we're like, okay, we're just gonna do this for the rest of our lives. But there's a lot of things that we need to kind of do ongoing as well, like attend, when like seminars, workshops, and all that to make sure that we're able to kind of like refine our skills in terms of like being a counselor or a
Mm,
therapist, or psychiatrist as well. So different treatment modalities, different trends in terms of like mental health, different specific issues. So there's a lot for us that we need to continuously learn after our specialization programs, which is a lot as well. So I think that is also like why it makes sense. We also need that learning to just go on for the rest of our career as well.
and let's not talk about research publication, yeah, because one pop that is 10,000 ringgit just to publish, okay, and we are not even talking about the cost that incur for the research itself, you know.
Yeah, what about you? Was your pathway towards becoming a registered counselor also as arduous and lengthy? Also, you want to share with us a bit about your journey on how your journey to becoming a registered
Wow.
counselor with LKM?
Well, well, I can really safely say it's not as arduous as Dr. Johan's journey. It's a little, less than that. Yeah. So I
No,
really
but don't
salute,
say that.
Dr. Johan and
Yeah.
Wenyi for really pursuing what they're doing. But on my side, actually Wenyi mentioned this just now.
Mhm.
You would either take a master's in counseling, or you would take a bachelor's degree in counseling psychology, which is what I did. So if you want to go for the master's in counseling, taking a bachelor's degree in psychology is not really necessary, but it will help you to understand the way people think and feel and act before going into that course. But in my course, the bachelor's degree in counseling psychology, which is a 4-year course, is a direct pathway to getting the qualification to become a counselor in Malaysia, because this is a special 4-year course endorsed by the Board of Counsellors Malaysia. So actually, Dr. Johan mentioned the disparity between psychiatrists and the population of Malaysia. I think the disparity for counselor to people in Malaysia ratio is not as big, but it's still there's still a lot of work to be done. I think last August the disparity was like one counselor to every 3,000 plus people, and we need to meet the Women, Family and Community Development Ministry's target of 1 to 500 people. So there's still a lot of work we need to do as counselors and in the other professions of clinical psychologists and psychiatrists as well. So if you're ever interested to pursue counseling, You can take that master's in counseling course in any public or private university. Or you can take a bachelor's degree in counseling psychology at public universities endorsed by LKM.
I just want to say that what you do as a counselor, yeah, and also what you provide as a clinical psychologist is so important also to support like the works of psychiatrists like Dr. Johan, because like we were discussing earlier in today's talk, uh, it's like one psychiatrist to 100,000 Malaysia, one or two to 100,000, and then we, so that's why we have, that's why it's so important we have licensed counselors and psychologists, clinical psychologists to support that also. Uh, so thank you again, Izumi, for your questions about about the cost of mental health care that sparked this very uh, interesting conversation. So let's take the next question from the audience. So hi Gray Ang. So Gray Ang is asking, is psychoanalysis still a thing? Are there anything to be learned from Freud or Jung or Lacan that is still in practice today?
Okay. Okay. So I think there is this very I don't know. It's human nature to, when we find something wrong with someone's theories or opinions, we demonize that person completely. So I wouldn't say that Freudian theories on its own, like how Sigmund Freud uh, the- uh, came up with all these psychosexual theories, right? On its own, it doesn't. We cannot use that for today's practice. However, psychoanalysis is very much a thing, and from Freudian theories, a lot of other theories came up into that form what psychoanalysis or psychodynamic psychotherapy is now, right? Based on Freudian's thoughts about the psychosexual development, and people have been building onto that. Even Young, his contemporary, was like built from Freud's examples as well, Freud's theory as well, to say that we can't do psychoanalysis just because we have debunked Freud's theory. I think that is very simplistic, because um, part of uh, like the kind of therapy that I like to do nowadays is more to CBT plus psychodynamic therapy, a weird combination of both depending on my patients, right? So like psychodynamic psychotherapy uses a lot of uh, Freud's basic idea, the egos, super ego, iceberg theory, and iceberg model, and things like that, right? We do use that, and because it still makes sense, and it still explains a lot of what's going on, right? We don't buy into the anal stage, the oral stage, and things like that, because we know that it's more sophisticated than that. But at the same time, we have to learn that we have to know where um, our roots come from, so that we can understand the more complex theories, right? And knowing all this is very, very, very important, I think. So if you ask me if there is anything to be learned from Freud, Young, or Lacan that is in practice today, I think when you will agree with me that basically all our therapy starts from them, right?
Right.
And
Yeah, sorry,
yeah,
go on.
no, go on,
Sorry.
please.
Yeah, I think like I agree with what Dr. Johan mentioned, because not to say that for me, I don't really say I practice like psychoanalytic approaches per se, but then there are a lot of theories that are very helpful in terms of like exploring certain things as a base to explore certain things with clients as well. So I think one for me, Freud's kind of like theories, the most common one that I use, I think, is more towards defense mechanisms. So a lot of different kind of like defense mechanisms that each of us do have when we experience certain things which are quite stressful for us, or quite makes us feel quite anxious. So we do come up with a lot of different defense mechanisms, and I think that is one of the theories that I really do learn a lot as well, and I do use that in terms of like in therapy a lot as well. So it's just more like a base to further like what we are doing in terms of like therapy. So to me, I don't really say I practice that directly per se, but it's just more of like a base to refer to when I explore certain things with clients.
You're right. And as well as that, just because we are learning psychoanalysis and things like that doesn't mean we are doing psychoanalytic therapy. It doesn't mean we are doing psychodynamic therapy. But we have to have that psychodynamic thinking or psychoanalytic thinking, right? When a patient comes to me and they have a very black and white thinking about what do you call this thing? Or someone is either very bad or very good, right? They're like what we call splitting, right? In knowing the psychoanalytic and psycho-development, dynamic theories, right? You would go back to Eric Erikson and think about where would the development, psycho-development halt, right? So, for example, when a person is very rigid, you know something happened in between the age of say 7 to 14, so you could explore that. You could keep that in mind. You don't have to do psychoanalytic therapy, but you can guess what's going on there, and using that theory, you can figure out what's the mechanics, what's the defense mechanism, what is the coping skill that the patient might employ, and knowing that that is how they think, or what trauma that happened at that time, you can latch on and then like try to fix that, try to resolve that issue at that age, right? Like, or where they are supposed to. So, yeah, it's very much alive, and it should be alive. And anybody who tells you otherwise needs to see me.
So this is it's very interesting to hear all the different theories in practice, right? Like, which one is applied and the amount of learning and research and practice the three of you did in three different professions go through to reach this point. I know it's probably a lot to digest and process for people listening. It got a bit technical at some point, but yeah. So this is all the people. This is to all the people out there who says, like, when you tell them, I'm going to see a mental health care professional. Oh, talk only, right? It's not proper doctor. It's just talk only. This is to you all who say that out there. Okay. uh, so next question, I want to do like one or two example scenarios. Also, we were supposed to wrap up at 9:05, but we have so many interesting takes here. Um, I hope everyone is okay. That is extended a bit longer. Thank you to Dr. Johan, Wani, and Dia for still being on here, and thank you to and you all in the audience who are still listening on, still staying on to listen. I want to explore this like example scenario, and this is for Leah because I think this is the common scenario that like some people have questions about. Also, like for example, your client during a counseling session with your client, and then you as a counselor discovered that your client has also been experiencing physical symptoms such as increased heart rate, indigestion, or insomnia, or maybe even like having suicidal thoughts. And would you recommend your client to then see a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist? And maybe you can give like a brief run through of how this process would go. Again, this doesn't sound as technical as earlier already, but I think this would be beneficial for like people listening who want to access mental health care for the first time. And so let's go back to something a little bit more lame.
Okay. Okay. I think I just want to follow through a little bit with the technical side of what we talked about earlier, just so the audience has
Okay.
something to look for.
Sure.
So
Yes.
if you have time to Google what we all talked about earlier, you can Google traditional psychoanalysis, which is not really applied now, and go ahead and check psychodynamic approaches, which is the more modern take on psychoanalysis that a lot of therapists are using today. So that's something you can Google if you're just a little curious about Freudian approaches, and so on. So I think the scenario that you gave, right, Jess, is a client who's facing physical symptoms, and would I refer them, and how would I refer them to a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist? And I think this is a very interesting question, but it's a bit in line with what we talked about earlier when we were talking about making referrals, right? Because I think we were able to walk through that already. So I think something I can answer now is, well, again, I will be working with the client and see how that process goes. But it also depends on where the client is at. Again, is that, are we in the, like, just the planning stage and these physical symptoms are coming up and are not going away, or are we in that stage already of doing our best to achieve goals, but then noticing these physical symptoms are not going away? Because obviously you can tell those physical symptoms coming out, like insomnia, increased heart rate, that could be symptoms of anxiety, and maybe a potential diagnosis may help. But I think to answer your question, if the client wishes, and it is in the counselor's best intention to further support this client, this is always something discussed with the client first, which is something I just want to emphasize. We don't just suddenly say, you see, you have all these issues coming up. I don't think I can see you anymore. Let me just send you off to the next clinical psychologist. It doesn't work like that. This is a like interdisciplinary, like care. We all kind of work together, right? So not only can a referral be made, but at the same time, and I think Wenyi or Dr. Johan was able to mention this, you can be seeing a counselor and a psychiatrist at the same time. You can be seeing a psychiatrist and a clinical psychologist at the same time. Because if taking medication and then having talk therapy is helpful to you, then you do just that. And I think that's all that I can say.
Yep, there's a lot of recap to what we talked earlier, but I thought it was also important to we bring back again and we look at how everything is very interdisciplinary in this case. So thank you, Leah, for taking the question. Let's take one question for the audience first. First, there's one from Elaine. Elaine is asking that she would like to connect with Ms. Wenyi on how to know more about the pathway to be a clinical psychologist. Unfortunately, we are running out of time and need to wrap up soon. But Elaine, we'd like to let you know that you can rewatch this replay on YouTube because where Wenyi has already covered the part where we were talking about the different pathways, how to be a clinical psychologist, and they also follow up the pathway to becoming a registered counselor. Dr. Johan also had input the long journey to becoming a psychiatrist also. So Elaine, thank you very much for your question. I hope that you will be willing to watch and the replay on YouTube to answer your question. Lastly, another questions from the comment box from Abdullah Akil. How to achieve benefits from short-term therapy? By short-term meaning 6 to 8 sessions as compared to long-term therapy, providing that the client has many unresolved trauma. Abdullah Akil, sorry, I need to. If you're still here, can you? Your sentence is not complete, not to. So if you want to clarify that, but I think we can answer your first questions first. Is short-term therapy 6 to 8 sessions? What if after 8 sessions and then still got many unresolved trauma? The client feel like a lot of things are still not unresolved. So how can we achieve the benefits from therapy? Wenyi, would you like to take a go?
Sure. Right. I feel like then again, this is very subjective as well. Of course, in the very first session, we do also look into like what Leah mentioned earlier on, also like setting certain goals. So, for example, if there's a lot of like unresolved trauma going on, what we usually see is that okay, so first session we kind of like look into okay, these are all these things that you're going through, these are all these things that you're experiencing. So, what do you feel like is the one that needs the most attention first? The most urgent ones first, for example. So what are things that you probably need help right now? For example, like physical sensations, if like you mentioned just now, what would be certain kind of like grounding stuff that we can do, which is to help you to manage the things that are a little bit more severe for you right now, more struggling for you right now. So there would be certain benefits that we would still be able to achieve, although if you're looking at only 6 to 8 sessions. But in the long term wise, if you feel like there's still a lot of different issues that you need time to kind of like look in depth or like more detailed, then definitely the long term ones would kind of look a little bit more onto that. So short term wise, there are still short term goals that would be able to help you to kind of like look into certain things which require more attention at that moment, so we are still able to kind of like manage with that. But eventually what we need to do is definitely to go into more like in-depth kind of like stuffs that you might be experiencing to kind of like help you to actually improve quality of life from there a bit more better. Yeah, I think that's my take on it. Yeah.
Okay. Would you also like to follow up and address Elaine?
Oh, yeah,
The
sorry, I
comments
just Yep. Oh, yes. So I think, like Elaine, what you can do is probably to head on to our website for the inner link, right? I think our back end tech will help us to also put up the link for our website. You can actually contact me from there, so that if I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have in regards to like how you want to actually become a clinical psychologist as well.
That will, when you answer, right? I think there is such thing as intensive short-term psychotherapy. I think ISE, something like that. Right. So um, s- some a full short-term therapy can even take place within an hour in a single session, actually. But this requires a lot of skill. It's something that I have not been able to do. But yeah, but it depends on a lot of things. First of all, it depends on the client's capability to accept therapy in the first place, and then it depends on the therapist's skills and need to handle this. But y- generally, short-term therapies are quite intensive. That's one. Secondly, it also requires a lot of work and trust from both sides. On top of that, uh, a lot of the times that we see is that while a patient or a client has a lot of traumas, right, it usually have only a few themes, like the themes of abandonment, the themes of attachment, and or whatever it is that some type of insecurity that plays on repeats itself throughout your life, and is the source of other trauma, like the multiple traumas that you have. So with I'm not saying that everyone only has one trauma, one type of trauma, but like usually it's very few. But it's just that in different setting, it comes out as different types of trauma. So what we can do is that with a therapist that is skilled enough, as well as a client that is very what we call psychologically minded enough to tackle this, you you can handle it in 1 or 2 sessions, even if you are very good at it. So but yeah, so unfortunately, with the people with most people of my generation and lower, we unfortunately do not have very strong coping skills or defense mechanisms, right? Our defense mechanisms are generally very uh, not as mature as it should be uh, because of economic statuses, because of political, all these things that are happening in the world are affecting how we deal with things, can. So a lot of us perhaps are not super suitable to do short-term therapies, but yeah, so I think that's my take about short-term therapies.
I think I want to be able to add on to what Dr. Johan and Wendy have already mentioned, not only on really identifying the certain things you want to work on, and also the kinds of short-term therapy that exist to help clients to process their trauma. I think, and Akhil, thank you for this question. The question, I think, also looks at how to achieve benefits and the point of unresolved trauma. And I think even for all three of the different professions here, we want to emphasize that a lot of the work that happens in therapy doesn't just stop there. There's a lot of work that's also put in outside of the sessions so that the client can actually apply the coping skills and strategies you learn in therapy outside. So this unresolved trauma that you put up in your question, Akhil, it doesn't mean that just after, let's say, even with the best sessions, 1, 2, 6, 8 sessions, that it's just going to go away forever. It's more about coping of work you're putting in to help yourself, to support yourself, to gain the support of others who can help you process it and just cope with it better and outside. So I think in that sense, with a counselor, a clinical psychologist, or psychiatrist who can support your own individual needs, that is when you can achieve those benefits already.
That's very true. Just one one small addition, right? When we talk about therapies, a lot of people think that the therapy session ends in the therapist office. It doesn't, and that's actually just the class that you take, the master class that you take. Your therapy begins with you, and it ends with you. So outside of the therapy sessions, you have to practice all the things that you learned in the class to to improve your mental health. It doesn't mean if you see a therapist 5 times a week or like 5 times a year, um, one is better than the other. It depends on whether you practice it outside of the clinic. The most that we can do is just show you the path. You are doing all the work, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think a lot people go into therapy or mental health care or psychiatric care thinking that, oh, okay, if I throw money at the issue, and then my therapist or my psychiatrist can help me. But what all here say are correct. I think that that the real work, the real therapy happens outside the therapy room. Yeah, I think that's a saying. That's a saying. I think maybe all you can agree with that people, unless somebody really wants to be helped, no one else can help them. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we are 1 hour and a half in already. It is 9:28 p.m. now. Let's wrap things up. Um, so so I hope after today, everyone has like a much clearer idea what are the differences and also the similarities between the mental health care and professional services provided by a counselor, a clinical psychologist, and a psychiatrist. And we hope that with all this information and knowledge that Dr. Johar, Wenyi, and Leah has shared with us today, those who are thinking about seeking mental health care, maybe for the first time ever, that you can use this knowledge to your benefits to make informed decisions when you choose wherever you choose to go and seek mental health care. But and just want to address one more the comments from the comment box by Abdul Akif. Choosing a therapist is also important, especially for the queer community, as not all therapists are quote unquote comfortable with it. Very true. So I'll just want to let you know, Akil, that the inner link, we are a queer affirming center. So if if you yourself or anyone else would like to access queer affirming mental health care, please reach out to us at www.theinnerlink.com, or you can look us up on our social media channels. And that's it. That is a wrap for today. Thank you everyone for tuning in and staying with us until 9:30. Thank you so much, Leah, Wenyi, and Dr. Johan for being here on the YouTube Live tonight with us. Before we go, I want to also share with everyone again that the Inner Link is launching the new chapter in Kuching on the 25th February. And there'll be an event, a launch event happening in Kuching. So anyone listening in, if you have friends and family in Kuching, please let them know about the Inner Link's new chapter launch in an opening event in Kuching. So the details is on our social media channels. You can look up the Inner Link on Instagram. Our counselor Leah will also be there running a mental health workshop. Unfortunately, I cannot be there in person to see you, but I wish you the very best. I'm so happy that you'll be running the workshop and that the Inner Link is doing this opening event in Kuching. Okay, that's it for tonight. Any last words from each of you that you would like to share with our audience before we leave? Like maybe an advice or something you'd like to tell someone who is listening in today, who is looking and thinking of seeking mental health care for the first time before we go. Leah, you want to go first?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I think to me it's still the same old thing that I mentioned just now. Like, don't wait, right? Mental health care is for everyone. So I think don't wait till like don't feel like things are not serious enough, for you to see a therapist. But anything, if you ever need help, do go seek help from what Dr. John mentioned as well. So like registered, licensed mental health professionals.
Thank you, Leah.
I guess to salute what Wenyi just said, I think don't be afraid to reach out for help because there are people who do want to help you.
Dr. Johan, one last word before we leave.
I guess well, mental health help is accessible. Fortunately, the government is very make healthcare very accessible, and you can see a psychiatrist for like RM5 a session. However, the government hospital being a government hospital and the huge amount of weight load, patient load, then you might not be able to do it as often as you need, right? But we will still try to accommodate as much as we can. So that's that. So help is out there, help is accessible. You just need to to take the first step.
All right. Okay, thank you everyone for your last words, and thank you everyone who stayed in and listened to the end. And thank you for everyone who asked questions in the comments also, because your comments really help like spark conversation and make the conversation more interesting. And with that, it is the wrap for today's YouTube live. Stay tuned for next month's YouTube live. We will announce the topic on our Instagram and social media page soon, because this is a monthly YouTube live show. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Nice
Thank you
to
so
see
much.
you all today.
Thank you for having us. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Take care,
everyone.
everyone.
Take care. Good night.